They always underestimated me. I was nothing more than a shadow in their world. Overlooked, dismissed, cast aside like an afterthought. I was the quiet one, the one who watched, the one they never feared. But they should have, because I remember everything. I remember the laughter, the sneers, the way they whispered behind my back as if I were deaf. I remember how they looked down on me, how they treated me as if I were insignificant, as if I did not matter. But they never stopped to think, what happens when the ignored stop being silent? What happens when the forgotten refuse to be erased? They thought they knew me. They thought I was weak. They thought wrong. I had waited long enough. Years of swallowing my rage, of hiding my true self beneath the mask of obedience, had turned me into something they would never recognize. They would never see it coming. Because while they basked in their arrogance, I was preparing every insult, every slight, every betrayal. Each one was another brick in the empire I was building, an empire they would soon bow before. The night it all began, the city lights flickered like dying stars. I watched from the rooftop, my pulse steady, my breath calm. The world beneath me was fragile, oblivious, unaware that the rules were about to change, that I was about to change them. They would learn the hard way. I pressed the button in my palm, and across the city, power grids collapsed. Darkness swallowed the skyline in an instant. Panic set in. People running, screaming, lost in the sudden void. It was only a taste of what was coming. I descended into the chaos with a slow, measured stride. There was no need to rush. The pieces were already falling into place. They always thought control belonged to them. That power was their birthright. But they had no idea what true power looked like. They would soon find out. And when the dust settled, when the world finally turned its eyes toward the one they had ignored for too long, I would stand before them and say, I will show them who I am. The city belonged to me now. Darkness stretched over the skyline like an omen, and the streets below churned with chaos. People stumbled in the black void, desperate for light, desperate for something familiar. But there was nothing, only fear, only confusion. Exactly as I planned, I moved through the alleys like a ghost, unseen yet present, a phantom orchestrating the descent of an empire built on arrogance. Their screams, their desperate calls for help, it was almost poetic. They had never noticed me before, but now, my presence was undeniable. Power, it was not just in strength or wealth. True power was in control, and I had it now. The first test was simple. The elite, the ones who built their thrones on the backs of the forgotten, believed they were untouchable, but I knew their weaknesses. I had spent years observing, dissecting their every move, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. The mayor's penthouse was my first target, a beacon of wealth towering over the city, its golden windows shimmering even in the blacked-out skyline. It was the home of a man who had built his fortune on broken promises, a man who had laughed in the faces of those he swore to protect. I stood in his private elevator, my hands resting in my pockets as the doors slid open to reveal his world. Pristine, untouched, a palace in the sky. He sat at his desk, illuminated by the flickering emergency lights, his face pale, his hands trembling over his phone. He looked up, his eyes widening. Recognition, but not of me. No, he did not know my face. He had never cared enough to notice me. Who are you? His voice wavered, his authority cracking. I stepped forward, slow, deliberate. I am the consequence. His confusion deepened, but beneath it, fear began to grow. Listen, I don't want trouble. I can pay you, he stammered, reaching for the briefcase by his side. The irony almost made me laugh. The man thought money could save him, as if his wealth had ever held real value. I tilted my head. Do you think this is about money? His fingers tightened around the leather handle. What do you want? I could hear the desperation in his voice. Good. I leaned in slightly, my voice barely above a whisper. I want you to feel powerless. He swallowed hard. He was beginning to understand. The building's security system had already been overridden. His guards were locked out, trapped in the lower floors, with no way to reach him. He was alone, vulnerable, just like the countless people he had abandoned. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small device I had been saving for this exact moment. A simple recording, a confession he had made years ago, buried beneath a mountain of lies. With a tap of my finger, his voice filled the room. They don't matter. Their suffering isn't my problem. If they want help, they can crawl for it. His own words, spoken in arrogance, now echoing like a death sentence. His face drained of color. How did you? I smiled. You should have paid more attention. He lunged for me, an act of desperation, but I had anticipated it. Before he could even reach me, I sidestepped effortlessly, catching his wrist and twisting it back. He gasped in pain, falling to his knees. Please, he choked out. I can make this right. I crouched down, leveling my gaze with his. Number you can't. With a final click, I sent the recording to every news station, every public channel, every social media platform. Within seconds, the world knew the truth. The protests would start by morning. The government would turn on him. His empire would crumble, and all he could do was watch. I stood up, adjusting my coat as I turned to leave. Behind me, the mayor collapsed against his desk, broken, one down. As I stepped back into the elevator, I allowed myself a small exhale. This was only the beginning. The city thought it knew its villains, but they had never met me. They would. By the time I was finished, they would know my name. They would speak it in hushed tones, in fearful whispers, as the one who had shattered their illusion of control. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. And as the doors slid shut behind me, I whispered the words I had waited a lifetime to say. I will show them who I am. The city was already burning before the first spark was even lit. News stations scrambled, their anchors speaking in hushed, frantic tones. The recording had gone viral within minutes, and the streets below boiled with unrest. The mayor's reputation had crumbled into dust, his name now synonymous with corruption, his once loyal allies turning against him to save themselves. I stood atop a building, watching it all unfold. This was just the first domino. A predator only thrives when its prey is afraid. And for years, the people had been afraid of their leaders, of the elite, of the ones who held the keys to their survival. But fear can be rewired. The moment people stop fearing their oppressors, the whole system collapses. Tonight, I had proven that. But there was still work to be done. I turned away from the sight of the rioting streets and pulled out my phone, tapping into an encrypted frequency. The response was immediate. A single buzz in my earpiece. It's happening, a voice said on the other end. I allowed myself a small smile. Of course it is. The mayor is in custody. They arrested him 20 minutes ago. The police chief is already denying any prior knowledge of his actions. Predictable, I murmured. The weak always cut off their own limbs to survive. And the others? I stepped into the darkness of the rooftop exit, my footsteps echoing in the stairwell. They will fall, one by one. Silence. Then, and after that, I stopped at the doorway leading back into the city. The air around me hummed with tension. After that, I said, we rebuild, because destruction without purpose was just chaos. And I was not here for chaos. I was here for control. The next phase required a different approach. The first strike had been loud, public, impossible to ignore. Now, it was time to move, in the shadows. I needed to reach the one person who had been watching all of this unfold with increasing unease. The one who still believed they had the power to stop me. Detective Julian Carter. He had been hunting men like me for years. A man of justice, of order, the kind who still believed in the system even when it was rotting from the inside out. The city's last line of defense, and the only one who could truly challenge me. I found him where I expected. His office, the blinds drawn, a single lamp illuminating the case files strewn across his desk. His face was etched with exhaustion, his fingers clenched around a cigarette he had not yet lit. He knew I was coming. I made no effort to hide my footsteps as I stepped inside. You're late, he muttered, without looking up. I smiled. You were expecting me. He finally lifted his gaze, his eyes sharp, searching. You're reckless, he said. You think you've won. I leaned against his desk, unbothered by the accusation. I know I have. He exhaled, shaking his head. You think tearing it all down makes you different from them? That people will see you as some kind of savior? I chuckled. I don't need to be a savior. His jaw tightened. Then what do you want? I studied him for a moment. He was not afraid. That was rare. I want a world where power belongs to those who deserve it, I said. Not the corrupt, not the entitled, the capable. He scoffed. And you think you get to decide that? I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. I already have. For the first time, I saw hesitation in his eyes, because he knew the truth. The system had failed. The people were already turning against the ones they once obeyed. Order was a fragile illusion, and I had shattered it. I stood up straight, adjusting my coat. I'm not here to kill you, detective. I'm here to offer you a choice. His eyes narrowed. A choice? Keep chasing me, I said, and you will lose. Or, I stepped toward the door, pausing just long enough to let the words sink in. You can stand on the right side of history. I did not wait for his answer, because in the end, there was only one truth. They could resist, they could fight, but in the end, they would understand. They would know my name. They would fear my power. And when the world finally bowed before me, I would look down at the ashes of their old world and say, I told you, I will show them who I am.